Let's talk about how we can identify DB Cooper without the benefit of DNA. Hey friends, how you doing? Eric Ulis here. All right, let's talk about what it is that we can do, what it is that we can use to identify DB Cooper if we don't manage to successfully get any DNA from the clip-on tie or anywhere else for that matter. Now, why this is really sort of timely is because, as many of you may know, I filed a lawsuit against the FBI in March of 2023, suing to get access to DB Cooper's tie from the FBI. And the judge recently issued a ruling with respect to that on December 13th of 2023, and I was denied. I was denied access to the tie. So in other words, the judge ruled against me. Now, having said that, I am working on some things here behind the scenes, and I can appeal the decision, and I can try to do some other things to try to get access to the tie and hopefully see if we can come up with a full DNA profile for DB Cooper that would still be on the tie. But the truth of the matter is that that just may not ever happen. So it naturally leads me, and I think presumably others, to contemplate, well, how are we going to figure out who this guy was if we don't have any DNA to work with? And again, it's looking kind of bleak at this particular moment in time because, of course, the FBI is not willing to play ball, and they're not going to certainly volunteer access to the tie, from what I can tell, anytime soon. Now, having said that, we're very fortunate because we actually do have some critical tools to work with here, and specifically as they relate to DB Cooper's skinny black clip-on tie, which was left on board the jet and was recovered in Reno, Nevada by the authorities when the jet obviously landed. Now, fortunately, when we're talking about the tie, Tom Kay, a scientist, got access to the tie on two separate occasions, once in 2009 and once in 2013, I believe is when it was. It's either 11 or 13, can't remember off the top of my head. But the point is that Tom was able to take some photographs of the tie, and he had these sticky stubs that he applied to various parts of the tie, which Tom still has in his possession. In 2017, these stubs were analyzed by Macron Labs in Chicago, and we do have quite a healthy data sheet spelling out precisely what types of particles are on DB Cooper's tie. And this is information that is ours. This is information that's already out there. This is not information that we have to worry about the FBI pulling back or holding back from us or what have you. It's out there, we have it. So let's see if there's anything we can work with respect to those particles, because I think ultimately that may serve as the key to figuring out who DB Cooper was. Now, there are really four critical pieces with respect to what we know about the tie and the tie particles. And I think if we factor in any kind of analysis, leveraging these four pieces, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, I think we can go a long ways towards identifying exactly where DB Cooper came from. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, the first critical piece, is obviously these three particles of this titanium and antimony alloy that I found on the tie about a year and a half ago. Very rare particle, very rare alloy, wasn't commercially produced, wasn't commercially disseminated. We know the chemical balance, basically 17% antimony relative to the titanium. And those three particles came from two separate stubs on the tie. Those are the only three titanium and antimony particles on the tie, and they all are exactly the same particle. So, I mean, if one would argue, well, this is some sort of error in the data or what have you, well, what sort of is problematic with that argument is that they were identified as titanium and antimony, obviously, but importantly, all three particles appear to be the same. So that would be a difficult thing to explain when you've got three separate particles and only three particles, titanium and antimony, found on two separate stubs. That would be very difficult to imagine how just by, bad luck or what have you, that, things happen to appear on the tie and data happen to overlap and create three of the exact same particles. So the titanium and antimony, I think, is a very critical piece to this puzzle. And obviously the titanium and antimony, as I've mentioned before, appears to correlate with a patent, a couple of patents from a company called REM Crew Titanium. REM Crew Titanium was headquartered in Western Pennsylvania, and they had a titanium research lab, and it does appear that D.B. Cooper came from that titanium research lab based upon these three titanium and antimony particles. So I think that's a very important piece to remember. It's also critically important to note that REM Crew Titanium was a significant subcontractor for Boeing, not only in their military aircraft, but also the commercial aircraft as well. So that's a nice, dovetailing or overlapping of information that I think is critically helpful as well. And boy, I tell you what, if these three titanium and antimony particles are as they appear to be, and there's no relationship to Boeing, that was just one hell of a surprise in my mind, because Boeing obviously seems to be part of this equation as well. So the titanium and antimony particles, I think, are three pieces of data, three pieces of information that we have from the tie that the FBI cannot take away from us. We have those. Again, if we don't get access to the DNA, let's just work with what we do have as far as the tie is concerned. So the other thing with respect to the tie is there's an abundant amount of salt on the tie. And as Tom Kay has talked about, the salt that was found on the tie is not of your food type variety. It's not the kind of thing you're going to pick up at McDonald's from French fries, this type of thing. It appears to be more industrial in nature. Why this is intriguing is also as I've researched REM Crew Titanium, there was a significant amount of research done on the effects of salt, the corrosive effects of salt on titanium. And there's a very specific term. It's called hot salt stress corrosion as it relates to titanium. And I've seen the documentation. There are papers written, research papers, well cited and so forth, that clearly indicate that people at REM Crew Titanium, one person in particular that I'm aware of, was actually studying the effects of salt on titanium. That's very nice, because that may explain the abundant amount of salt on D.B. Cooper's tie. If there are other places where this type of thing was going on, that's the kind of thing I would like to know. Now, having said that, it's not a requirement. Perhaps D.B. Cooper lived in a cold weather climate and, a place where they applied salt to the roads in the wintertime, and maybe that accounts for it as well. But I do find that very intriguing, the fact that there's an abundant amount of salt on D.B. Cooper's tie. That salt got there somehow. It got there somehow, and there's enough of it on the tie where when I find this information, again, also pointing to REM Crew Titanium, I think that that's critically important there. Third thing that I think is really important to focus on here is there is a particle that we have photographed, and again, this was by Tom Kay's group, that shows a piece of commercially pure titanium with stainless steel smeared into it. And that's critically important for a number of reasons, because when you're talking about the 60s into the very early 70s, titanium was pretty doggone rare. There were a couple of fields, aerospace field, the chemical field, that used this stuff, but it's pretty rare. And commercially pure titanium is even that much more rare. A lot of this titanium, especially in the aerospace, was alloyed with something else for a variety of reasons. So to find a piece of commercially pure titanium with stainless steel smeared into it is actually very intriguing, because again, you're just not going to find those two things together very often. I would argue very few occasions you're going to find some way to explain how there's some sort of literally a mechanical application of the stainless steel whereby it can actually get smeared into the titanium. Why that is a very important piece of the puzzle as well is because, again, when we're talking REM Crew Titanium, I have documentation that specifically shows how how stainless steel and commercially pure titanium were actually worked together. I believe it was on an item called a cap well, which was something that was used in the chemical industry. So I know with certainty, at least in the case of REM Crew Titanium, that I can account for that particle, commercially pure stainless steel smeared into commercially pure titanium in some mechanical operation. Again, if anybody is aware of any other place where this could possibly have taken place, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to know, because again, I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle. And when we're talking the fourth thing I think to keep in mind here with respect to the particles on D.B. Cooper's tie, we've really got two classes of particles. We've got these very small particles that appear to have come from a lab. And then we also have some particles that appear to come from a very sophisticated machining environment, machining shop environment, very sophisticated metals, that type of thing. And I suspect that that is also probably relatively rare. Again, focusing on REM Crew Titanium, I know with certainty that the Robinson Township facility, which was located in the outskirts of Pittsburgh, that their titanium research development lab building had the research lab on one side of the building and had a sophisticated mechanical shop on the other side of the building. The engineers would, cook up various alloys, things of that nature, literally walk these things over to the machining part of the facility, and they would be cold rolled and pressed and drilled and stretched and all kinds of mechanical things to test in a real world environment, how these new alloys, these alloys that they're experimenting with, how they actually respond to various things. So those are four critical things, all of which in my mind appear to point to REM Crew Titanium specifically. Now, having said that, I have looked around, I've tried to find other places, other businesses in the 60s going into the early 70s that can account for this type of thing, but there are very few, very thin. I must say, especially when we're talking about the titanium antimony particle, the only place that I'm aware of that this could possibly have occurred or been picked up was at REM Crew Titanium. So my larger point with respect to this video is I'm going to continue to try to get access to D.B. Cooper's DNA, because obviously that's the holy grail. But the reality of the situation is it may not ever happen. And if it doesn't happen, we have to be creative. We have to work with what we have. And it's very fortunate. I believe it's very fortunate that's 2024. We've got very sophisticated scanning electron microscopes and all kinds of things. And it's very fortunate we have the tie. So actually, if we analyze the 100,000 plus particles that we know with certainty came from D.B. Cooper's tie, I actually think that they do tell a story, and they come up, let's call it a close second to DNA in terms of presenting us with the ability to identify where D.B. Cooper actually came from, where he worked, and I think in all likelihood, who the man actually was. So again, if you have any comments or questions, or if you have any new information that you can present to me with respect to other places that may be able to account for some of those four elements that I just described there, please feel free to email me, eric@ericulis.com. And until next time, as usual, folks, cheers.